Okay, hey everybody, we are back here looking at the Ghost Ship project here at Merchant House Wednesday during the AAA meetings, and have everything set up. So far nothing has broken or run out of power. Actually, if you saw this morning's video, more sunlight, so I think we're getting a much better effect with some of the lights here. By the way, I'm trying out my newer kind of Land Rover tripod setup. It is really wobbling, so we're going to see what we're really going to test the DJI stabilization. I've had great luck with it, but man, it looks like it's absolutely wobbling back and forth. So this would be a great test for the stabilization and also for this tripod setup here. It just goes on an A to B loop for any of you videographers out there. If you're doing something in a studio space, I thought it would actually be cool for musical performances in the studio, presumably with a floor that's a little more stable. There are some grooves in this floor. But enough about that. Let's talk then a little bit about the setup here. So again, as I mentioned this morning, you know, what we have here is something quite different as far as projects that I've worked on. So when you first enter the space, hopefully you'll see some of these crumpled papers here, and originally these papers were going to be on the floor, and there are instructions that I added to the top of the Ghost Ship table to try to give people a sense of what you can play with, what you can touch, what you can move, and so forth. And I just thought it would be more interesting to put these here in the netting, and it has the various voices of the project talking about kind of the exhibit here. There's a bit of surprise below here, and that has an epoxy cast skull and has some miniature people. I should have brought my second camera rig here to show you some close-ups, but I'll show you some of that later for sure. But it has some mini people inside there, and as I talked about this morning, I did a song once called Homo Soccer based on the book by Giorgio Agamben, and that particular work kind of is inspired by that book, and so I brought that into this piece as well. If you know about Lacan, you can check out all the A's, the objet petit a. So the table itself has a few different components. So there is sort of a gamified element. I was telling someone today that if I could do this in a bigger format, I would probably do it more as an escape room, which is something that I've done in one of my classes. It's quite a bit of work, but the interactivity and the immersiveness of an escape room is always, I think, worthwhile. So, but this element has 4 decks of cards, and these are inspired by Fluxus cards or Brian Eno's deck of cards for creativity. There have been a few of those. IDEO also makes a creativity card deck. So this has 4 decks that you can choose from, and so you just spin the spinner, and whichever one it lands on, in this case it landed on truth. So we can pick a truth card, and it says here, imagine truth being smuggled through the back door of a conference. In your mind, describe exactly how the scene appears, settings, characters, actions, etc. So kind of a fun interactive element that really is inspired by the Fluxus sort of games that you may be familiar with from the 60s, 70s onward. Other like pirate accoutrements on here, we have the Ghost Ship, and the mast of the Ghost Ship has writing culture on it. If you check out the opening quote, which really frames the entire project, it's Mick Tausig's review from the late edition series, which I was a part of in I think the 2nd volume, where he talks about George as the Ghost Ship captain and sort of anthropology sailing into this uncertain terrain. And in fact, behind here, I'll show you a video later, there's a pretty interesting quote, and most of this work is derived from AI interpretations of Zoom conversations that George and I had. So I think you'll find that it's very difficult as the sort of legend or the guide, which is the chat bot pages that I printed out in the green text there, that really tries to describe what this project is, the challenges of it, And really, to go back to Roland Barthes or Benjamin's work on the author, sort of like problematizing this idea that we can tell who an author is, right? It's just like in musical improvisation or jazz or people riffing in musical settings, it's very hard to sort of speak of, pure authorship and a text, as Derrida talks about, right? Having sort of a context onto itself that is impenetrable by outside forces and influences and so forth. So that kind of became the framework actually for this particular journal, which really was the first thing that I worked on. And I'm still curious if this video is going to be shaky. If it is, you're going to be annoyed, or I won't use this, or you'll be, I guess, amazed if it's not, because it's so smooth, depending on how the stabilization works out. We'll figure that out later. But so this was the original piece that was going to be sort of the log of the whole project. And I think initially this was going to be the main thing, and then it just started to evolve and other elements came along. I actually turned to the page of my wife, Crystal Lucas. She wrote a poem called Overheard at the 105th Annual AAA Meetings. And I forget when that was. It was a super long time ago. Curiously enough, what we did was, for fun, I said, we're going to take her poem and we're going to put it into AI. And she read this over, and she actually thought it was a pretty good poem overall. I was kind of surprised. I realized that, okay, quick adjustment. I realized that this was actually tilting, so. Hi. Yeah, I'm kind of doing a video voiceover right now, but yeah, I'm sorry. Is this your only time you're visiting, or you want me to stop? No? Oh, okay, adjust the camera. So yeah, anyway, the remix that AI did, in her opinion, as a poet, was, and I thought it was good too, by the way. I'm not a poet, but it did an interesting remix. So if you're here, you can definitely check out the AI version. So again, conversations, context, influences, different spaces. For me, as someone who does work primarily in immersive spaces, the sort of work of the project, like the Institute, if you've seen that project in San Francisco, other spaces like Area 15 or Meow Wolf are certainly influential. And I think what's interesting about AI is that opportunity to really experiment broadly with all sorts of different styles. And there's a curious, almost black box effect, I think, working with AI. I was describing to someone this morning as akin to, of course, Flux's stuff, as we talked about, of course, John Cage and Yoko Ono and many others, Dick Higgins, Happenings, but very much, I think, also the traditions of automatic writing and the surrealists, but at a much different level, and I would almost say a profound level. Or if you think of Burroughs doing the cut-ups, where you would take text and Dadaist did this as well, and chop it into pieces and then sort of rearrange those through randomness or chance operations. This is a much different level because there is indeed a context that's being applied. And I think this is, the area where AI becomes so interesting to me, is this room opportunity to talk about transhumanistic arguments, singularity, all the Ray Kurzweil stuff. It seems like all the tech bros in Silicon Valley right now are sort of talking about this as this sort of new kind of God or spiritual force. And there was just an article I meant to check out, but I've been here in New Orleans this week, but I want to share it with my witchcraft class because it's a very interesting reflection on sort of these new religious orders developing around AI. In Switzerland, Japan, there have been AI saints and prophets and churches even. So yeah, the Ghost Ship Journal then is very extensive and kind of done in a, I guess you could say, a collage style, if you get a chance to look at it. And you could see it's very much hard to manage and hard to bring on a plane. Just real quick, the other things here is there's a visitor's journal that you can comment in the journal. Thank you to the Postal Incantations group for supplying the pen, which I forgot. There are other sort of piratey accoutrements. We have In the back here, pirate coins, just driftwood and so forth. The new Instruo, very similar to their Scion Euro rack device, which I have, but this is a portable one. And I wanted a local plant, so I stopped at Rouse's Market and got a green onion, and that is playing indeed the sound that you hear. We've got some AI-generated waves, some video on this screen, and throughout the space, 5 speakers that have different sounds ranging from waves to kind of more ethereal sounds for the gift shop. And in addition, as I mentioned, the table has all these sort of to-do things listed here for people to hopefully look at some of the other items on the table, ranging from immersive space images, which George had suggested to include more. Kind of was my project, or a future incantation, if you will, or evocation, to quote Steve Tyler, the late Steve Tyler, of the Immersive Worlds Handbook, to try to maybe envision that as an experimental world's handbook. So more to come on that, but that's kind of what these images represent in this folder. Some wacky patents. Here we have the culture area dislocator stick, so you can look at various crazy patents. Again, these are all created by AI with kind of minimal prompting. I say minimal prompting in this because one of the things I really wanted to do was to sort of give over authority to, if you will, the black box of AI. And I realize for those of you in computer studies and even linguistics and of course mathematics, it's not necessarily all about randomness, but it certainly does have that ability to allow you to lose yourself, lose your voice in sort of the black box of AI. And then lastly on the table, we have newspaper clippings. So there is, I don't know, maybe 100 of these, quite a few, a number of these newspaper clippings. And I just realized my miniature lights I don't have going, so I'm going to get those going in a second. I forgot to turn those on. So newspaper clippings to check out. And on the floor, there's kind of a mess here, and we have, I started messing with epoxy recently, and it's really sturdy. I made this epoxy piece. I saw these on Etsy, and I wanted to do my own. So I used 3 different kind of pigments in here, some grass, this is a fake cigarette, a real Bud Light can, and then some turmeric for some of the coloring in the piece. So it's sort of imagining the idea that the partiers come and trash the Merchant House exhibit of the Ghost Ship. So in addition, there's this board here that has the phrase, and by the way, people have asked about this phrase, method is a leak. And AI actually came up with that, and someone this morning said it was corny and clever at the same time, and I tend to agree with that. The funny thing is, kind of to reflect on AI and agency and authorship and voice, is when I was trying to really, if you will, interrogate AI and say, well, how did you come up with this method as a leak? And my assumption being that it was thinking of a leaking ship, and you have leaky method, and again, I kind of like that as a metaphor. But when I really pressed AI about it, it claimed that I had indeed created the phrase. So I found that kind of hilarious. And so at that point, I just went with it and said, you know what? If you're claiming I'm the author, then we're just going to go with that. So that's kind of where that phrase originated. The panels then are a technique. Originally, I was going to create this book, and this is a hypothetical. What is ethnography in 2045? And it sort of imagines, I was doing some research here in Osaka this summer, and it's kind of this panel here describes that, this hypothetical idea that it's 2045, and folks in the Osaka metro station uncover these book panels, if you will. So originally it was going to be a book, and then my wife, when she looked at it, said, oh, it's not going to be that easy for people to sort of manage to flip pages on a wooden book, so hence these panels. And I had this screen from my performance days for some projections we did, so I just repurposed that with some clamps on the top. And the fun part actually was doing the actual panels using Liquitex, and that allows the image, it takes about 24 hours to adhere to the wood. And you have to do it in reverse if you have any text for obvious reasons. And then you kind of carefully sponge it off with water, pretty good amounts of water. You can also do it with Mod Podge. This tends to work better. It's a little more spendy than Mod Podge. But what you get is kind of a vintage look to it. And so in addition to that, I added some paint and some stain on the boards. So spray paint, acrylics, and then also stain. And did all the kind of holes and then tied those together with some kind of rustic looking twine. And there's two sides to that. In addition, I wanted to have some motion, so there are 6 vines that are on wind chime motors, and I'm hoping to repurpose these in the future for some electroacoustic sound experiments, because they move and they're really cheap and they're easy to use. They run on a D battery. And then behind the whole thing, you're going to see, and again, I'll give you some video later of this, maybe just walk through it, giant posters, and the posters kind of reflect various aspects of this project that AI created over the time of the project. So yeah, that is a good overview of it. I will show you the backside later and also the gift shop. So yeah, thanks for listening, and more to come here. Merchant House, Wednesday, AAA meetings here in New Orleans. Thanks for listening.